This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. Okay, what is your name?
JT Wilkins.
Where'd you grow up, JT?
Grew up in Newark, Delaware.
Newark, Delaware. Where'd you go to school?
Went to a private Christian school through grade school, and then went to Delaware Military Academy in high school.
I actually didn't know that. So ninth grade to 12th grade, you were at a military academy?
Yeah, it was like a Navy junior ROTC thing. I was like the first charter school in the state of Delaware to be like based around the junior ROTC deal, and happened to be the first graduating class from there. So that's pretty cool.
It was a brand new academy?
Yeah, brand new school. I went in there, and it was, so it's kind of funny, like the first year, it was in Wilmington, Delaware. And the first year that it opened up, it was designed to be a leadership academy, or just like, make better citizens, basically. Well, what that got translated to in the area that was in was like, let's send all of our badass kids to the military school to straighten them up. So it went from like, you have this mixture of kids that are going in there that, truly are interested in the military and just the overall like leadership, of coming through that type of academy. And then you have like kids that belong in like juvie in the same place. So it was literally like the weirdest, like quasi group of people. After the first year, they kind of got rid of a lot of the troublemakers, and it was a pretty cool place to go to school.
So you did public school, middle school, that for high school?
No, I did private school in middle school, elementary school.
So it wasn't too radical of a shift.
Yeah, it wasn't too much of a shift.
I can't imagine what it's like going to a military academy. So did you get in trouble a lot as a kid? Were you the latter category, the juvenile delinquent category?
No. I think for the most part, I was a pretty good kid. Like pranking, like at the time that I grew up, like Jackass was like the big thing that came out, So like I grew up in the Jackass era. So of course, like my buddies and I, we would just go out and do dumb shit, all the time. Try to get it on video at the time. That big ass camcorder. Take out there with
the VHS in it.
Yeah. The VHS tapes, sort of like the little mini ones.
Yeah.
So it wasn't more like we never got. There was maybe a handful of times where there was a little bit of police involvement just because of dumb stuff that we did, but for the most part, it was pretty low threat.
When did you realize you wanted to get into the military? Was that the point of the military academy, or did that just happen as a consequence?
No, I kind of knew like from like a young age that the military was something I was super interested in. It was just for no other reason. I have no members of my family that were like diehard military people. My dad spent a couple of years in the Air Force, just, basically did his college paid for. My grandfather on my mom's side, he served in the Canadian Army before they immigrated to the United States. That was years and years and years ago. But after World War II, after Korea, they did all of that kind of stuff, and then came to the United States. So
what was the draw? What was the impetus for you to actually make the decision to get in?
I think it was something I always wanted to do. I saw the military members throughout my career and the service members that would walk around the uniforms and all that kind of thing. I was like, that looks pretty cool. And then obviously 9/11, that was a big piece of it. I think I was in 8th grade at the time or whatever, and, watched the Twin Towers fall. And I think like most people in our, GWAT era, 9/11 was probably the bigger catalyst one to get after and actually do something about it. So yeah, that was really it. And then, overall, just, I had a draw to it my entire life, and I can't even pinpoint exactly why.
Why did you pick the Marine Corps over all the other branches?
I went back and forth a lot. So when I went to the military academy, it was a Navy junior ROTC. And so we had 4 chiefs and senior chiefs, a mixture of both of those. And then we had 1 gunny. And I was like, this guy's like awesome.
Even though the gunny title is just badass.
Right. I was like, that's what I want to do. And then of course, you do the uniform inspections, and they would come in the dress blues or in the, the service uniform. You're like, that looks awesome. And he was like I think he was like a motor key mechanic or something like that, or, what his career was. But stories were just awesome about the different experiences and seeing the world and, going on the ships and everything else. And I looked at all the other branches. I looked at, what I wanted to do. And just the Marine Corps is what stuck. And so a bunch of buddies and I, we enlisted. I got some migraines as a kid. So I had to go and do a bunch of testing, which pushed me back from like all my friends that went to boot camp and went to Parris Island, right after graduating high school. So I had to go get a bunch of, medical paperwork done in order to join. And then I went to Paris Island in September of 2006.
So you have one of the weirdest journeys I've ever seen in the military, from where you first started off. I don't know what the Marine Corps calls it, but like the rate in the Navy, your specialty, to where you ended up. So let's start from the beginning. Why, if I'm correct, did you join the Marines to be a fireman?
Yeah. So I initially, I had this idea of like, I want to go in, I'll be a rifleman just like everybody else. And then as I was talking to the recruiters, they were looking at all the different jobs that were open at the time. And in 2006, there was a huge push into the air wing. They needed people to go into the air wing side of the Marine Corps. And so that's what happened to be, open at the time that I wanted to be able to get in. And so, we were talking through what was available, and it was like this category. It was the 70XX series MOSs, and it was like airfield services. Crash fire rescue was like the sexiest thing out of all those things that you can go do. So I was like, that's awesome. And talking to the recruiter, happened to be a crash fire rescue guy, walked me through the whole thing, what they do outside of just like firefighting. There's just a whole lot more that they did. So it's like, sweet, let's do that. That sounds awesome. Huge push for it right now. And then I was thinking to myself, I don't know if the Marine Corps is going to be my long-term thing. So I want to have something that maybe I can step into on the backside. So when you get to boot camp in I think it's the last 2 months of boot camp, they give you your MOS designator. And so, of course, I signed up for airfield services to go into crash fire rescue. And they're like crash fire rescue, air traffic controller, or operations. And so, of course, I got like the operations job. That's what I actually wanted, right? But it took me on a cool path, because like normally you would just go to a standard like fighter wing and you would support the pilots and you'd go through whatever they needed. And I got sent over to 2nd Low Altitude Air Defense Battalion, so a Stinger Battalion. So I got to kind of live more of the ground pounder lifestyle while still, having this MOS that didn't really match for that type of job.
Yep.
And so I did that. That was my first 3 years in the Marine Corps.
You told me a story before about getting busted down. I want to dig into that a little bit, because it's not like the JT I know. So getting busted down in the military, explain what that is and what happened behind it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a kid, I grew up 3 miles from the University of Delaware. And so, as you can imagine, that's a huge party school.
Yeah.
I had a cousin that lived on Cleveland Avenue, just outside of the university. And so, as a kid, I would go down there and party and underage drink and, do all that kind of stuff. And that kind of carried its way over with me into the Marine Corps. I was a little bit of a partier. So I was in Meridian, Mississippi, which is like the armpit of the United States.
Sounds like
and we were just getting ready to finish up our MOS school. And a couple of buddies were like, hey, let's go out on the town. Let's get out in Meridian. And so the base is like 20 miles from the actual city. And city's a very loose term for what it is. And I think we went to like a Chili's or an Applebee's or something like that. And they started serving us. And so we got just obliterated at the bar, underage, and then we had a curfew. And so we made it back like just in time for the curfew. But as we were rolling through the gate, I had a guy that was with me and just acting like an idiot, coming through. The MPs pulled him out, breathalyzed him. Of course, he popped. I actually got back to my barracks room, passed out, just on the bed, and I just like this knock on the door,
dude.
And it was the staff NCO, the staff sergeant that was on duty that night, and she pulled me out, and the 2 other guys that were with us went and sat us down. She actually thought that we were obeyed, so it wasn't like a big problem, and I was going to try to play that off for a little bit, and then they realized it. And so anyway, all that long story short, we ended up going to non-judicial punishment, and I got busted down from private first class to private.
All right. So you got busted down, and then you obviously got back on track. And yeah, you mentioned to me briefly, but let's dig into it. You had a mentor basically at the time who helped kind of unfuck you a little bit. You want to talk about how that happened?
Yeah. So I think I got like a little jaded after the NJP situation. It set me back behind my peers, and I looked at it like, this is dumb. I'm 19, whatever I was at the time, it was just some fun out in town. And so, when I got to my unit, that obviously put a black mark on me initially. So I got, fucked with a lot by the NCOs. I had the sergeant, man, he just rode my ass every single day. He just was complete. He was a hard ass. I needed it, but he was an asshole, and there were some times where I definitely deserved it. I just had like a little bit of an attitude problem. And so I had a hard time putting the motivation into the Marine Corps at the time. So that went on for probably, I don't know, 12 to 18 months, something along those lines, just trying to like get myself into what does this lifestyle look like? Because I had lived I think a pretty easy lifestyle for the most part as a kid, and then being thrusted in the Marine Corps where you've got all walks of life. Yeah. It was just something that, I was less prepared for, I guess. So about the 18-month, 2-year mark in the Marine Corps, this gunny showed up, and his name's Terry Owen, and I still keep in contact with him today. Just an absolutely phenomenal human being. And so, he saw that, like, he definitely was hard on me, but he worked me towards like my strengths. And so I would say within like 4 months, there was just a complete like 180 from where I was at. I think within 10 months of that, I got nominated for like a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal.
Well, let's dig in that. What happened in that 4-month period?
I mean, just he spent time just looking at, okay, these are the things that JT does well. Here are the things that we need improvement on. And he gave me more responsibility, I think was the biggest thing. So by adding things to my plate, walking and just saying, here's the things that I need done. Here's the things that I'm entrusting in you. Go do it. And then like own that and walk that all the way through the process. That kind of sparked something in me. And so it went from, just kind of being a shithead to really laser focused in what I was doing. Everything improved after that point. I went from being kind of a slacker on the PT front, and then I was crushing it on the PFT and the CFT. I guess CFT wasn't at the time, but yeah, everything just improved.
So the solution to being a shithead was more autonomy, more freedom, more responsibility. I imagine that's not like in today's day and age, like the solution to a lot of ills. I wonder, it obviously works for you. I mean, what did it do to your younger self to be able to get like given that autonomy and that ownership?
Yeah, I think it was just like knowing that a senior leader that I trusted and I respected put that same trust and respect back into me, and having that opportunity to go out and own those projects and do the things that he needed me to do, and put me in these different leadership positions, I think accelerated my growth in the Marine Corps. So yeah, just an absolutely awesome human being. I literally just talked to him 3 or 4 weeks ago, just checking up and see how things were going. He's, been retired for 5-6 years now. But it's good just to keep in contact with good people. So after like the 3-year mark, I was on the fence whether or not I was going to stay in the Marine Corps or get out. And, he obviously pushed me and said, I think, you need to give us another shot. Like you need to try to do this again, like keep yourself going. You're doing it. You're in this really good spot. So I ended up looking at the trajectory of what my career was going to be in ops. And I knew I didn't want to do that for a long time. And then I also realized, looking at the job market and both ends of looking at, hey, I'm potentially getting out. Let me see what's going to be transferable. And I realized there's probably not a lot that I was doing that was super transferable, because it was just basic, operations and admin stuff doesn't carry over to like a project manager role somewhere else. So I decided to look at the intelligence field, and I went down that path. And so I ended up re-enlisting as a geospatial intelligence analyst, and I went to school up in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. So I went up there as a corporal, as an E4, spent 9 months at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That's where the school and the college is at, learning the trade, understanding everything that comes along with like, being a basic intelligence analyst, but then taking like a geographic flavor on it.
I think that's awesome. You go from being a self-described shithead to meeting this gunny, having the mentorship, and then making it to that for that 9-month school. That probably was no joke, right?
Yeah, it was a tough school. It was very intellectual. There's just a lot that came with it. And then being able to get thrusted into an environment where it's like, well, we've just been doing like exercises and, getting out to the range and whatever else. And then you go into this intelligence agency and you're seeing some of the work that these people are doing and the impact that it has on, the broader national security strategy. This is pretty cool. This is actually really neat. So, my choice was to go back to Eastern North Carolina. I go to Camp Lejeune. So their 2nd Intel Battalion at the time was getting ready to go to Afghanistan. So put my request in for that duty station. And then I got orders to Okinawa, Japan instead. So complete opposite of anything I wanted to do. But it ended up being like a huge blessing. I mean, going out to Japan was absolutely amazing.
Did you have any deployments up to this point leading up to Okinawa?
No, I didn't.
You were CONUS the whole time?
I was CONUS the whole time. Yeah.
And then, all right, so what did you do in Okinawa?
So I got out there, got to 3rd Intelligence Battalion. I was on Camp Hansen, which is pretty far up north on the island. And I spent 3 years there. My first 18 months was actually at the Intel Battalion. And I mean, my job was basically to do imagery and maps and things like that. It got pretty repetitive, and I kind of got back into that. Like this is dumb. Like we're literally going and doing the same exercise that we did 6 months ago, but we got to recreate all this stuff because it needs a different date on it or something. And so it's like, this is dumb. Like, what am I doing? We're not doing anything. Meanwhile, my buddies that are in, on the East Coast, second MEF, they're getting out the door and going to Afghanistan. So I was pretty upset about that. But then, I just kind of owned what I had to being in Okinawa, and an opportunity popped up to go be a leadership academy instructor. And so I spent, my first 18, 20 months or whatever at the Intel Battalion, last year or so that I was in Okinawa. I went over to the Corporal's Leadership Academy as a sergeant. And I was started off as an instructor and then ended that as the deputy director of the course there. And, got to do a lot of really cool things in terms of, leading and teaching young Marines that just came up from a, non-leadership position. That's the first non-commissioned officer rank that you have in the Marine Corps. And really the first time that they're going to take like a TL position or go into a potentially even like a squad leader position. So you get to help mentor those Marines through that process. And going off of what I learned from Gunny Herb, got to apply a lot of those methods that I think helped other Marines.
And then where'd you go from there?
So, when I wrapped up, when you're in Okinawa, you get kind of your pick of the litter at the end. So I ended up, I had two choices. The Leadership Academy, the director of the academy was a former drill instructor. And so he was like, I want to push you to that direction. I think you did great on the drill field.
I think you would have been a great drill instructor.
Yeah, it would have been. I think I would have liked to have done it.
Yeah.
But I had those two options. So I had drill field or this like really weird billet popped up at United States Central Command in Florida, in Tampa. And so I was like, that sounds awesome. Like, I want to go to Tampa and go do this and check out CENTCOM. And again, the timing sucked because it was like 2013 time frame where everything had wound down for the most part in the Middle East, or at least like the major combat operations. So I missed it again. This sucks. So I get to CENTCOM, and then shortly thereafter, the JV team, ISIS, it steamrolled the entire country. We basically started fighting a war from Tampa for like the first 6 months. So I was almost like deployed at home, basically. I was working this crazy shift. And before I got into like the operational side at CENTCOM, they sent me to Joint Weapons School up in Virginia Beach to go learn everything about weaponeering, targeting, what type of bomb body does what. I basically did everything except for become a JTAC.
Can you explain what all that is for people who don't know the military lingo?
Anytime that we release, a weapon off of an aircraft, there's a lot of different things that have to go into place. So, for guys on the ground that were doing the combat operations and they would call airstrike in for close air support, it's a little bit different than when you're setting up a target to get struck based on, intelligence or whatever, and just doing the straight, air operations. In Iraq and Syria after ISIS, took over, we pretty much didn't have any boots on the ground. There was no one really there. So we were fighting the campaign basically from the air the whole time with a contingent of soft guys that were actually out there doing the Lord's work. So anyway, I got back from Joint Weapons School, and then we started, just pounding the crap out of ISIS for the next 6 months. We were probably doing 40, 50 airstrikes a day, just wearing them out. And just tearing the country up. It was awesome. I mean, it was a great time to be able to push back on these guys.
You were doing this from Tampa the whole time?
We were doing it for Tampa for the first 6 months.
How surreal is that?
It's wild being on the other side of the world. And then, I mean, literally pressing a button or, being on the phone saying we're clear. And then, on the other end of it, you're taking life.
Were there any boots on the ground, like observing this, or was it straight up through technology?
Straight up drones, fast movers, big bombers, you kind of name it. And I mean, we did it all from Tampa or from other areas, that might have been supporting us remotely.
What was the drive home from work after that? Like, what did you What were you thinking about when you got done doing a strike on the other side of the world, driving home through Florida traffic?
Doing what you're doing at work all day. And obviously a lot of that's classified. So like you can't even like talk to family, about what happened or whatever else. You say, we did some stuff today at work and just got to decompress. And at the time I actually lived on base. So my commute was like 4 minutes. So
you didn't really get to digest
it. I didn't get the, so at home you just kind of sit back, but we were so busy that, I was working, I think from like 2 a.m. to like 3 p.m. every day.
Jesus.
For like 6 months. So shortly after, all that was going on, Operation Inherent Resolve, they got the named operation for back in Iraq and Syria. They stood up a combined joint task force in Kuwait. And so that's where they wanted to move all this stuff from.
Yeah.
So I ended up going out to Kuwait for a couple of months. I guess it was in the fall time frame of 2014, 2015, something like that. Going and standing up this first strike cell in that environment. And, based on like the ROE changes, the rules of engagement changes, things like that. There was just a lot of stuff that the guys that were staffing that out of the Third Corps for the Army, just out of Fort Hood, Texas. Those guys just weren't tracking all this stuff. It happened so quickly they couldn't get trained up to do it. So we had been doing it for so long. They're like, well, why don't you just go out there and do this? So I went out, forward for a couple of months, and then stood that whole thing up, and we were wrecking house for 3 months from Kuwait instead of Tampa.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool. It was a good experience. So that kind of led me into my first real, combat deployment. So I ended up going out a month and a half after getting back from Kuwait to, with 7th Special Forces Group out of Eglin Air Force Base.
So SF. Well, how did you get attached to SF?
So I went joint, the CENTCOM thing was a joint command.
Yeah.
And so as we were sitting in Kuwait, there was a request that came through from the Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan for a strike. They needed to set something up. They'd gotten I think we'd gotten 3 or 4 MQ-9s that were just given to us to be able to do the Lord's work with. So the request came over to CENTCOM, like, hey, we need somebody to come out there and support the strike team. And so I was like, well, I want to get out the door. Put me in coach. I'm ready to go. Even though I was only back for a month, I basically came home for Christmas and then went right back out the door in January to Afghanistan. So I ended up getting in with the Special Forces dudes, sat in their cell for 6 months of that deployment with a super restrictive rules of engagement policy at the time. Because at the time it was like, we went from wanting to wipe out the Taliban to now it's like try to build the country back up.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't allow us to strike structures. So there was this huge problem with collateral damage, which was couldn't strike a structure unless it got approved, which is crazy because for the last 15 years, you could just wipe out whatever you wanted. Yeah. So this was shortly after I got there, this ROE change happened. So we had to create all these different collateral damage rings around anything that would be potentially a strike. And so we were doing a lot of shooting dudes on mopeds and cars and, whatever they're doing, walking down the street with an RPG kind of thing.
With what? From a Reaper?
Yeah, from a Reaper, typically. Reaper, Predator, you kind of name it. We had a couple things in theater that we could use. The biggest problem was that, as they're driving along these little roads, there's these little huts that pop up all over the place. So, I was tasked with doing real-time collateral damage estimation while we were doing a dynamic strike.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, so it was basically you're doing on-the-fly math to kill somebody. It's kind of the way that it worked out. So you'd have, the bird that would come in, and I would look at it and say, all right, this guy's on a moped. He's traveling about 30 miles per hour, 30 kilometers an hour. And we've got, another 500 yards of green terrain, no structures there. So then you got to figure out on the back end, okay, if it takes the bird 15 seconds to get in, then time of flight's 25 seconds because they're sitting a couple miles away. So then you look at, okay, he's going to travel over 25 seconds, 30 kilometers an hour. How much distance is he going to make in that period of time? And then say, we're still good to shoot this guy, and that's what I did for 6 months.
Were you doing this while you were boots on the ground?
Yeah.
Walking in the green zone?
Yep.
Interesting. What, do you have a risk coach? How are you keeping track of this? Do you have a clipboard? What was your...
Yeah. So I had just a little spreadsheet, just kind of gave me the distance and calculation of how much distance over a period of time, I'd be moving. Just that basic calculation on the backside. And so it would be, I'm sitting in one seat. We've got our air guy that's sitting next to me.
The JTAC equivalent, basically?
So then we had a CCT. So, Air Force Combat Controller. That was our JTAC. And he's ultimately the one that was calling in the strikes. But it was He's making sure the airspace is clear. I'm making sure that what we shoot is legal. And then, ultimately the JTAC is saying cleared hot.
I didn't even know that was a role. Like I assume if anything goes wrong, they're looking at you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
your math better be right in 25 seconds.
It's not a good feeling. We had an awesome team for that deployment. And I mean, we just got, for as restrictive as it was, we got after it really hard and got a lot done in that couple of months.
I'm curious. So what's a concrete situation? So if you're walking with a group of Green Berets alongside a river, you see a guy with a moped half a mile away, what happens?
Yeah. So, I mean, if the guy's on a moped and he's got
with an AK-47,
and he's got an AK, and it's a threat. I mean, in that case, that's like a self-defense thing, right? Like, this guy clearly is a threat. So I'm not involved in self-defense. You can do whatever you want at that point, within reason. If it's more of like a planned clearing strike on the front end. So we had this operation that was getting ready to kick off down in like Sangan. As we were doing the overflight, a couple of our 60s and the 47s were getting shot at by a disco that was getting taken out of this.
Yeah, that's bad news.
This building. So we got, the approval initially to go do it as like a self-defense. So we we're going to put, an F-16 with, 4 2,000 pounders over that.
Oh, that's good.
And just, wipe it completely off the map. And then because somebody up at like the higher headquarters, some lawyer got involved. They're like, well, it's not out there all the time. So, you can't do that. So we had to do this whole plan strike process and get that done. So, when you see something like that, that's coming over the feed, it's pretty easy, to be able to make the argument that we can go and put a couple points on this thing and go put, 8,000 pounds of freedom on it.
8,000 pounds is no joke.
Yeah.
You'll feel that one from a long ways away.
For sure.
What happened after this part of your military career?
Yeah, so I while I was out in Afghanistan, there was some recruiters that came from another portion of SOCOM, and they asked me to basically, try out for this other unit.
Is this because of some sort of reputation you established? They heard about you. They had a warm recommendation.
No, I just happened to be the guy out there at the time that, wore a funny uniform compared to everybody else.
Oh, for real? That was it?
Yeah. It's like everybody was in cries and I was in, desert multicam, Marine Corps uniform. But they started to open up Marines to do some of these tours, and so I went out to assessment selection, and ended up making it through that pipeline and that process. And I got to do some cool things with in the SOCOM environment for the next 4 years of my career. But that all kind of happened because of my choice to go over to CENTCOM and start this whole experience.
So, like in this command, what did you do? The same sort of work, targeting?
For the most part, it was a mixture of supporting the targeting side and then supporting like the raids that would occur. It was like true intelligence work at that point, So
can you talk about like some of the examples of missions, some kind of templates?
We'd find some shithead that would be held up in a portion of the Euphrates River Valley in Iraq or in Syria, and we'd get the green light from somebody to say we need to go and take this guy off of the deck of cards, basically. You'd set up, over top of that location. And so we'd be doing everything from, on the intelligence collection side, figuring out, what devices are there, what type of, cell phone, iPad, do they have Wi-Fi? What are they doing? Can we look into any of this stuff? How do we start looking at these things to figure out and confirming, is Abu shithead in that mud hut, right? So you'd sit on it, we'd set up the target for a while, try to collect up as much information as we can. And then we just did the basics and like look at where are all the entry points to this facility? How do we get people in and out of there? How do we make sure that, the helos can get in? What are the conditions right now? Just even from like a weather perspective. When I did my first Iraq deployment with those guys, we ended up having a helo go down on our deployment, lost pilot. It was because of these the conditions out there, the desert, right? It browned out and ended up hitting the rock with the tail rotor.
Yeah.
And then, spun around. And so like all that stuff were things that like we needed to try to identify, on the front end. Then ultimately, Murphy's Law comes in, but that's the type of stuff that we were doing to prep before the raid package would actually go out or the raid would actually go out.
How many deployments did you do there?
So I did 2 deployments there. I did 3 total combat deployments, and I did, I guess, 5 total, deployments, and then 3 years in Okinawa. So I spent a lot of time outside the United States.
What conflict zones? Iraq, Afghanistan, others?
Did Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan.
Okay. All the hot spots.
Yep.
What would you say out of all the experiences you've had, the different commands, the different specialties, what was the best 1 or 2 aspects, the best things you could remember?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I look back to like my Afghanistan deployment as like just the peak of my entire career. We were just loose and fast,
Yeah.
had an awesome group of guys that just, were completely mission driven. I mean, we'd sit there and try to, shoot a guy for 16 hours a day, kind of thing. And it was just a wild way to live, for that period of time. But it was awesome. I thought that was the peak of my career, getting to do, live in that environment and then, do the work that we were doing. And then, Afghanistan at the time we went from having, I think, like 100,000 boots on the ground to like 8,600 in the entire country. And that was about the time that I was out there. So, the difference in just what it was 4 years ago to where it was, when I went out there, it was pretty wild.
What about the worst aspect of the military?
I think it's the lack of control for your own career progression, right? The hard part, right, is that you're tied to these staffing requirements, right? You have no control over. So you could be the greatest brain in the world, but like you have no way to chart your own path because ultimately someone else controls that on a clipboard somewhere in Quantico, right? Just because that's your timeline. And so, going back to my NJP in 2007, that followed me all the way through my career. I got sent up on multiple meritorious promotion boards. And that's the one thing that set me back every single time. I blew everybody else out in terms of like, operational experience, getting out the door, at that point in my career, because I'd gone and deployed and done all this stuff so many times in such a short period of time. But, that set me back a little bit. But then on top of that, just the arbitrary like rules behind the promotion timelines and everything else. So it was super frustrating to be in that environment where like you can't chart your own course. And like, no matter, your performance, you're stuck in that environment. I think that's the most frustrating part of the military. Obviously, the worst parts are the loss of friends and things like that in combat moments. But, I think that's a given for just about anybody who could fill that. But I think in terms of the actual military environment, it's just that structure is good until it's impeding your ability to grow up.
Yeah. So I guess that ties into why you transitioned out. What was the ultimate decision process in saying, all right, I'm done. I'm not going to do the full whatever period of time I thought I was. What was the impetus?
Yeah, so I was a gunny. I hit like the rank that I wanted to hit in the Marine Corps. That was like the one thing throughout my entire career.
Yeah.
I don't care about doing anything else other than becoming a gunnery sergeant. I was at the 13-year mark, but I just got promoted to gunny, and I knew my time having fun was getting ready to end, and I was going to go back to what I lived the first 6 years of my career. So I had kind of an opportunity presented to me, to be able to leave from the environment that I was in SOCOM and have a really good transition pathway. And I met a lot of really cool people. And I think one of the things that was for me was like, I'm relevant right now because of the work that I had just been doing as a doer. And I wanted to be able to leave with relevancy rather than go up, into a management or a leadership position in a conventional unit again, and then kind of lose that relevancy. I started the transition, process of getting out of the military, at that 13-year mark. I ended up doing 14 years on active duty. I did another year in the reserves. But yeah, the transition was like, it was a wild process. So when I made the decision, I kind of stuck with it. I didn't go back and forth. It was like, this is what we're doing. I got to set the family up, make sure that we're in a good environment, when I leave in a good spot. So I basically got 18 months of transition, and I knew that I was going to get out.
That's huge.
Which was absolutely, it was such a big deal for me. In between that, I was still deploying. I was still doing workups. I was still doing exercises, doing different places that we needed to go. But I was able to start doing a lot of networking through that time and figuring out, like, I think the number one thing that I figured out through my whole like networking process was what I don't want to do. When you get out, there's all the like, I looked at, just like everybody does, you look at the Amazon, military pathways, you look at the Bank of America financial
consulting
services,
pathways,
consulting and everything else. And that's what's funny is I ended up doing that, right? I ended up picking that. So you look at all those different things that you have at your fingertips, and you just kind of learn like, this is what I actually don't want to do. I don't want to be in a warehouse. I don't want to be in a suit and tie every single day going to, a financial services location. And so I did like 200 informational interviews with just guys that I found on LinkedIn. And
200 basically phone calls.
Yep, 200 phone calls.
That's abnormal.
I have a book that's probably an inch thick, just of notes of talking to people.
Oh my God, you did your homework.
Yeah. And I just, I went into it and I said, look, I'm not asking you for a job. I want to hear about your experience. So I'd reach out to a guy on LinkedIn. It would be, let's say he's at, GE Aviation or something. So I type in GE Aviation on LinkedIn, and then I would put, past companies and list, the military branches out in there. And so I would say I had almost a 99% return rate anytime I would, email or shoot these guys a note of, hey man, can I just get 10 minutes of your time to tell me a little bit about your experience? I'm getting ready to transition out of the military. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do.
And then you did the consulting thing. How long were you doing consulting?
So Accenture at the time had a junior military officer program that they opened up to enlisted guys. And so I ended up going up for an in-person interview prior to my last Iraq deployment. So I flew up to Chicago, went through the whole process, got my offer, and they're like, yeah, we'll hold it for you until you're out, which was I think at that point, it was in September, and I wasn't getting out until March. So it was an incredibly long time that they were willing to hold this for me, and I'm super grateful for it. So I ended up going, my last Iraq deployment in October of 2019 through the end of January 2020. I came back a little bit early just so I could start my transition pathway out. Of course, a month and a half after I got back from, or a month after I got back from Iraq, the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So I transitioned out in March of 2020 at the height of COVID. I didn't even do like a going away ceremony. Couldn't even get my physical DD-214. Jeez. They just emailed it to me and were like, here you go. Here's a signed copy. Thanks for your service. I was getting through that transition process. I got the dreaded phone call from Accenture 2 weeks before I was supposed to start. And they were like, hey, we're going to have to push your offer back 6 months. So fuck, I got 90 days of terminal leave, but there was a financial plan in between that in order for me to kind of hit some of the goals that I wanted to hit. So I needed to go out and find a job. So when that happened, I went right back to that
phone call book,
basically, and started reaching out to my network. And I swore up and down I was never going to go back into doing anything with the Department of Defense. I just wanted nothing to do with it. Then I took a job with a defense startup.
Not only defense, but a startup.
Yeah. Yep. So I joined the company as employee 6. I was fortunate when I was transitioning out that I got to sit on the other side of the table, the federal DoD requirements board. So I started learning, just through osmosis, basically the acquisition process in the military, and that gave me the opportunity to kind of parlay that over into a new job. And I still was super fresh. I didn't know a ton about it, but they were willing to take a chance on me because I did the job that their product was trying to solve just previously. And I gave them a laundry list of things that I think we could do with it. So I jumped into that. It was fun. It was super loose and fast because it was 7 people, and then we had some contractors and things like that. And started selling back into the DoD. That was a lot of fun for a while. At the beginning of my tenure with that company, I handed the CEO a list of 10 things that the product needed to do in order to make it useful for the end user. We get about 12 months into my employment with them. None of those have been implemented. None of those were even a priority on the roadmap. And then I'm up there doing the song and dance when the shit breaks and doesn't work in front of people, tap dancing, trying to say, well, we would do this if it worked right now, but it fucking didn't, so, I got tired of that. And then I got tired of kind of just the lip service that, that was coming along with that. And so I started putting the feelers out and started to look at different things. And I found ZeroS.
Let's look at the cultural aspect. So that's huge. You identified there were some shortcomings in the product. Tiny startup. The nature of any startup is going to be small, super dynamic, and has to be a master of unfucking itself. What was standing in the way of those improvements being acted upon? Where was the fault in the culture that enabled that to happen?
There wasn't a good feedback loop. So it was the most bureaucratic startup you've ever seen. It was incredibly siloed. So we had 2 BD guys, was me and the VP of the company. And then we reported over to the CEO, and then there was the dev guys on that side. And so we were basically told we can't really speak to the dev people without getting the CEO involved. And so he just very much was in the weeds of all of those things.
But he wasn't connecting them, I guess.
He was not. And the problem is that I could sit there and say, here are all the priorities that we need to do. If it didn't fit into the CEO's priorities, what he thought it should do or what he wants it to do, it just wasn't, it was kind of gaffed off. So the communication was a major problem. And then it was like extreme micromanagement, to the point where it's like, guys, like we have a lot to do right now. And if we want to grow this thing, like I need to be able to be pretty autonomous to get out there and do it. 9 a.m. stand up and a 5 p.m. stand down every single day for the whole company, just basically to make sure that, the people were there. And I was like,
that's very military.
It's very military. And the guy that's running had no military experience, which is wild. So
it's kind of weird. I'm looking at like your background, the intelligence aspect. Most people, when they're getting out, don't have good recommendation for the business they're going to work for. You spent however many years in the military. Was it just the analytical part of your mind that looked at this thing and like said from first principles, this is what I think has to be improved in order to be able to sell it? What was your thought process? How did you know to do that?
Yeah. So, like the product basically was a 3D common operating picture is really what it was designed to do, where I could take, one piece of data from somewhere else in the world and load it into this system, and I could see it from anywhere else. Yeah. And so I had just lived this problem in Iraq. We were the only part of our command at the time that dealt with both the Basra consulate being attacked the year before when we were in Iraq. And then the next year, the Baghdad embassy got overran. We were downrange for both of those. And the biggest problem is that you've got a ton of military units in that space trying to respond and do the right thing, but nobody's coordinating with one another. Something as simple as a grid reference graphic, which is basically numbers on buildings to make sure we're all on the same page. The most basic situational awareness thing. And we were all operating on different stuff. So there ended up needing to be an airstrike called in, and it said building 12. Well, building 12 on ours is something that might be building 6 on theirs. And that's a major issue depending on who's got what. So I saw that as like, that right there solves that problem. But yeah, I saw that as a pain point that I just lived through, and I could go and sell that to people because I understand it. I understand the problem. And I know other people deal with these problems.
You don't strike me as like having had some sort of breakdown of self in your transition. You seem to be pretty even keeled about it. Is that true? Did you have any struggles in your transition from the military?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, without a doubt. Like I went in the military at 18 years old. I did it for 14 years.
Your brain developed in the military.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I matured as a Marine. So that identity sort of crisis that came through with that is, transitioning from being gunny to being JT again was just kind of tough. I mean, it was certainly something where I looked at it like, man, I put in all this time in the military, and I'm kind of walking away from it at this point. I have a great career. I mean, I got a phone call from a guy that basically wanted to follow in my footsteps into command. And he was like, dude, I can't believe you're leaving, man. You're in zone for master sergeant. You're going to be a master gunnery sergeant. Like, no doubt in my mind. And he was a master sergeant at the time. So, I mean, I had that in the back of my head. Like, I had the trajectory. Yeah. I could be an E9. I could do all these things. And then, I looked at like, what's the most important thing for me right now? And I just basically spent the last 6 years either deploying, training, or going through like the selection process, which, is horrible on its own, in terms of being able to take time away from family and things like that. And I want to be able to give back and spend the latter half of my kids' lives at home and being a part of their life.
Let's get into sales. So I'm curious to see, we've never actually talked about this from this point of view. So people think of sales, they think transactional, they think it's just like a business thing. But I think you approach it very different. You didn't have any intention of doing sales. And here you are, you're running a sales team, not long out of being in the military. What is it you like about it? Let's start with that.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I never saw myself as a sales guy. My dad, and my mom, they grew up in the car business. My dad went from a sales guy to a buyer, did a whole bunch of stuff in management. So sales was in my life for, most of my life, but it was something that I looked at the used car sales thing and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the transactional guy. Right. But then as I kind of grew into my role on the defense side, so obviously I did federal first, I saw that I'm actually solving a problem. I'm helping people find a solution to a pain point. And so I looked at it less about this just transactional relationship, and more so I'm kind of your trusted advisor through the decision-making process for you to go with our product or somebody else's, or at least it needs to do this or that. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds of doing almost like a consultant basically for figuring out, how can we improve somebody else's life or their experience or, whatever their processes are.
The oscillations are worth thinking about for a minute. So like sales it's a vacillation between hell yes and like, oh my God, this is terrible. You never know where it's going to end up. You eat what you kill. How do you kind of deal with that internally? Like, what's your internal dialogue when it comes down to that uncertainty?
Yeah. I mean, I think the military helped a lot. It's like going to SEER school, right? You get locked in a box for 3 days and, you get beat up and get slapped around and stuff. But
survival evasion. It's school to prepare you for a prisoner of war, basically.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And, you got to find like the fun in it, right? I like to tell this story. It's pretty funny. So we have this portion of the school where you're doing like an urban evasion, thing that puts you in a white jumpsuit, blindfold you, and put handcuffs on you, stick you in this room in some random building in North Carolina. And it's like 7 p.m. at night or whatever. So it's just about dusk. And so you finally break out of your handcuffs, you get your blindfold off, and then, you're free out in the town basically to hit these couple of locations that you need to navigate to and do all these things. So like that experience sucks. You're out there, it's cold, you're in this freaking jumpsuit, it's raining, it's not great. But like the funny parts are, we open the door to this building, it ended up being some like random strip mall. And I like fall out of the door in this white jumpsuit because I've like tripped on something. And there's these 2 ladies that are just looking at like me. They're like, what the hell is going on? And so like one of the instructors had to come over and kind of explain that like we weren't just kidnapped. But I go back to like sales, right? Of like, like you have these really high highs and these really low lows, but having gone through like experiences that for most people, that would be absolutely horrible. They do kind of suck, but you just kind of, get the joy out of dealing with that suck and the experience on the backside of it. I think specifically with sales, it's just nothing but constant problem solving. And you're always asking yourself, what are the things that we could be doing differently in order to get to yes? And sometimes that's never going to happen, and you have to be prepared for that and be able to make the decision to move on, get off the X, because you're just wasting time, and it's the law of diminishing returns at some point. But sales is much like the military experience, where you're doing the day-to-day grunt work to achieve a larger thing, and then it just changes in the way that you look at it. Instead of having a mission accomplishment, it's you're transacting a sale, which helps you grow the business, and then in turn helps that client solve a pain point.
What do you think about sales for military? It wasn't a thing like in my knuckle dragger brain when I was in. I didn't think it was like the two paired. The experience I've seen is that military actually tends to do really well in a sales role. I haven't quite put my finger on why that is, but like you had an intuition to do 200 phone calls getting out. That's not normal. Like that's a level of analysis, and like you keep saying problem solving. What is it about, let's say, a military mindset that might actually fit the sales role?
Yeah, I think, from a really early age in the military, you're given a leadership environment and a podium to stand on. So whether that's leading 4 people or 30, you get an opportunity to stand up in front of those folks and say things that hopefully make sense, and you're leading those people into different environments. So I think it's the same way in sales, is that you're just bred very early on in the military to be able to speak, smartly and concisely, get the mission done, work whatever you need to, and then I think guys that understand that do really, really well. I think, I look at it like the F3EA, which is like the soft targeting methodology, which is find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. And if you can master that, that just the find, the fix, and then the finish part, and you understand that from that perspective, sales is no different. You're doing it just for a different end state and purpose. So I look at it like that. If you can understand F3EA, you can do sales. What
do you do to get yourself ready for the day? You have like a morning ritual?
So, I live in Florida, it's beautiful all year round for the most part. And I'm fortunate to live pretty close to the coast. So almost religiously every day, take the dog out in the morning and we'll go out. We have a beach in our neighborhood that overlooks the Tampa Bay. And we'll walk out on the beach and just hang out for 15 minutes, sitting right on the seawall,
You
just
and the
kind of
dog.
decompressing with me and the dog.
Yeah.
Or just even, if the dog doesn't want to go or, tired or we've wood drilled a little too much, the dog's getting a little bit old. I'll just go out there and just sit there for, 10, 15 minutes overlooking the water, just kind of decompressing to get the day started.
Mm.
Get a workout in, do whatever. But that's kind of like my Zen moment for every morning.
What about like at the end of the day when you want to turn off work mode, spend time with the family? What is the transition from work mode to family mode? Is there a ritual? You have certain things you like to do?
And I don't,
You don't transition?
I probably don't do that well at that, honestly. At this stage in the game and having as many, people that rely on me here in the business, and then having that many direct reports right now, it seems like it's always something, it's always going. But, I try to do a good job of being in the moment, putting the phone down, putting it in a different room,
Really?
and then focusing on, my daughters come home from school and they want to tell me, what they did at school. I try to be in the moment with them. It's hard. It's hard to get lost just even outside of the sales side, right? I mean, the digital environment that you live in, right? Your phone's always strapped to you. And
tell me about fishing. So you seem to have like a Zen of fishing thing going on. You literally go out there by yourself. What's going on out there? Like what's going on in your head? What do you get out of it?
Yeah, I think like there are a few things in this world that give you more freedom than being 60 miles offshore with nothing else around you, no one else around you, just you out there in that environment. And, I've got all the safety things to make sure that like if I had a problem or the boat had issues that, I could radio back, or I've got a satellite phone on the boat, if there's ever a problem. But, being out there and just being offshore, it's just so peaceful. There's nothing else. I mean, I love it because there's no cell phone range.
Yep.
I have a sat phone.
Oh, that's great.
So there's no way to get a hold of me. And by the time that I'm coming back into the bay where the cell phone service comes back, it's like I just got that peace for the last 6, 7 hours.
7 hours.
Just 7, 8 hours. I mean, I'll leave at 7 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then not come back till 5. In certain cases, and it's just it's awesome. I mean, in certain cases, you're crushing fish all day long, and you get to go to the saltwater grocery store basically, and then bring them back home and eat what you caught. And there's something very like savage to going and getting your food from the ocean, bringing it back, filleting it right there, and then putting it on the the cast iron or on the smoker or whatever at the end of the day.
7 hours alone on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Like that's almost like a meditation retreat for a lot of people. It's like what's going on inside of your brain for 7 hours?
It's like pure bliss at that point. I have no one that can get a hold of me. It's just, I can do whatever it is that I want to do at that point. I have complete control over everything.
But what do you do on the boat? It's got to be inside of your head. What's going on?
Obviously, you got a pole in the water, and you're hoping to catch whatever's coming up, and hopefully that's a good day that's keeping you busy doing that. It's almost like nothing. You kind of just blank, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not thinking about what's back at home. I'm not thinking about work at that point. It's purely what I'm doing in the moment, 60 miles offshore and, crystal blue water, trying to reel something in, and it's just, the level of peace that I get with that out of anything else in my life is just, it's amazing. It's astounding.
At the 7 hour mark, do you not want to come back in, or you're like, all right, I'm ready to go home now?
It depends. I mean, it's got a little hot in Florida recently.
Right.
So, but 93 degrees out on the water, it's pretty fucking hot.
Smoke.
You're kind of ready. I mean, I get to that point where I'm like, all right, I had a really good day out here. Let's go home and enjoy the fruits of being out there. But yeah, I mean, of course, I want to go right back out the next day, or do it as much as I can. And the beauty of it is just being able to enjoy that also with my family and friends, and being able to go offshore and have that. But there's something peaceful to just doing it by yourself every once in a while, having that just you time.
What are 1 or 2 or 3 books you think other people should read?
Yeah, so it's probably pretty cliche with a lot of military guys, but Stan McChrystal's Team Teams.
I never actually read it.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely phenomenal leadership and management book that anybody can read and pick up and understand. And he does such a good job of tying everything back from like his, commander of Joint Special Operations Command and leading, these elite units out in combat and trying to set it up in a time that was, at the time in the military that he was in, and talking about it throughout the book, there wasn't like this really good joint concept. So you had a lot of people doing things on their own that didn't translate well into working well together. And so he kind of talked about how he used the decentralized leadership approach, allowing people to work towards their strengths, allowing the lowest unit leader to make decisions and have the trust from the highest brass. Like those two, like that concept in and of itself is something that I think everyone should, just take a moment and read through and really understand how that impacts your potential leadership style in the future.
Do you apply that now in a business environment?
Yeah, I try to. I mean, I think there's two sides of it, right? There's one where you can be super laissez-faire with your team and not be on top of it. I look at it more so, the decentralized leadership approach is if you hire the right people and you hire good people,
That's right.
that you don't have to worry about that. You set them off, you give them a mission, and we'll have them execute. And then, it's kind of that trust but verify, type of style, right? You put them in a position to do well, and then you support them in the best way that you can.
What about movies? 1, 2, 3 movies you think everyone should see?
Wolf of Wall Street. That's my favorite movie in the world.
Is it really?
Yeah, I literally love that movie. It's not just because of how stupid and funny it is, but it's just, I think when you look at the absolute hunger of the guys that were in that environment, and right, wrong, and different, what they were doing, it was obviously illegal, but I love the idea of just that type of just savagery of just getting after it and wanting to be successful. I don't know. For me, that's a great one.
Last question. One person, dead or alive, you'd want to have a conversation with?
I got to serve underneath General Joseph Votel. He's a Ranger 4-star. And there was such a stark difference. So I got to serve under 2 4-stars when I was at CENTCOM. General Lloyd Austin, who's currently at SecDef. And then I got to serve under General Votel. And then the just absolute stark differences in their leadership style and the way that they approached the Middle Eastern problem set, because you're talking about the guy that just, immersed himself into that environment, learned the culture, learned the dynamics. As a staff sergeant, I never got much face time with the general, right? And so, I think just based on having been able to serve underneath of him and getting, an hour sit down just to listen to him. I don't even want to ask all the questions. I just want to hear from you to me, tell me what you're the walk from, second lieutenant Ranger to 4-star general, having led SOCOM and CENTCOM and JSOC and all these amazing units. He's kind of the guy. That's one of my idols of military career, I guess. That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.